There is a fifth dimension.
About the unknown.
Beyond that which is known to man.
The Garden of Thought.
The Babylon Project was our last best hope for peace.
Unexplained.
Mythologies.
This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call
The Garden of Thought with Jeff Lippman.
Welcome, everyone, to an episode of Garden of Thought. Have a new guest in this week, and it's going to be exciting because, first of all, it's going to be a little bit guest-led, which I did before with another group earlier in the month, but this is different. We're going to be doing some bunking and then debunking. We're not going to be fighting Charlie Wilson's war. We're not going to be singing like Jackie Wilson said. But we are going to be listening to Dr. Joseph Wilson. Yeah, that was what the Wilson lines are about. Dr. Joseph Wilson, he's a guest lecturer at University of Mass Amherst. He is an archaeologist and first time in the show, so welcome. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Thanks for coming on. So our exchanges have been a lot of fun because at first I was like, is he like really worried about everything? They're like, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, I don't care, whatever you want. I think I can roll with anything. And so for about 3 or 4 weeks, we had settled on the Shroud of Turin, which I'm like, I've never done a show on the Shroud of Turin. I remember, in search of, in the 70s, watching the Shroud of Turin. I tell you, even like 7-year-old Jeff was not particularly compelled by the Shroud of Turin. It never really looked like it was evidence of a deity, let alone even really clearly a person. But I'm happy to talk about it all, and it seems to keep coming up, and 7-year-old Jeff and 57-year-old Jeff has to be adaptable to what people are interested in. But then it's like, my expertise is in pre-Columbian exchanges with or connections between the continents, and I'm like, okay, all right. And I'm like, all right, we can talk about white Indians, we're going to talk about redhead giants, we're going to talk about Atlantis. At some point, I think like the pyramids came in, and so whatever it is, Dr. Joseph Wilson, Joe, as you said, I can call you. You start wherever you want to start, and let's see how we do.
All right, yeah, so the reason why I had suggested the Shroud of Turin is because it's one of the things that I've been working on writing a paper about. There's been recent work it's been one of these topics that's been argued about for a long time among very passionate people, and there's been recent work that's shown, like new historical data that's shown that it was viewed as a fraud by people in the medieval period, that it entered history with a lot of skepticism attached to it, even in the post-Black Death era in France where it originated. That was part of the sort of post-Crusades era relic racket, right? Or the way that a bunch of the shipment, the lost ark in Ethiopia that Graham Hancock wrote about in The Sign and the Seal is another one of these examples where, everybody coming back from the Holy Land is going to sell you something that is the authentic thing from the Bible times early on. So, yeah, so that was why I was interested in that. But you're right that I have a lot of these topics. I'm interested in a lot of wild and crazy ideas. My own work deals with Bronze Age metallurgy and weapons technology paradigms, and the way that those new forms of warfare and weapons technologies spread throughout the world in ancient times and end up traveling from continent to continent. So my work deals with what we call the diffusion of technology and culture and language and religion. So I end up, because there's a lot of controversies with that, I end up getting into the wild and woolly kind of topics with people who are interested in these other controversial things. So Yeah, so I'm a weird archaeologist in that I wear a lot of different hats. I sort of follow these esoteric topics around a lot. Most of which I deal with skeptically, but occasionally I come down on the side of the more, how shall we say, iconoclastic perspective myself.
Interesting. I wonder if I should tempt fate or not. I came into the show really sort of as Fox Mulder. I want to believe, but I don't know that I actually believed in anything necessarily. I mean, I sort of got into this world the way a lot of people did. They read the Da Vinci Code, and it seemed interesting. So then I read a whole lot of books that were like the Da Vinci Code, and then sort of mimicked it, but went into different myths. The original candelabra or menorah, the calf, the ark. Every church has a piece of the one true cross. The spear of Longinus. You name it. They were all there, and then it went into other things and Templars throughout Europe and the New World. And I don't need to get you the list or the audience either. A lot of things go back to Atlantis. But like in all these stories, and I fell upon fingerprints of the gods and chariots of the gods too. And lots of people noticed that there were lots of similarities. Where they all lost me was, and this is why I'm going on this little thing, is because one of the things that the gods always brought to people was metallurgy, and the metallurgy at that point was basically mixing, tin with copper and making bronze, which, is great technology, changed a lot of things then, but not exactly godlike. And, and things like that sort of get overlooked. I understand that Talmudical scholars and rabbis spent hundreds of years explaining why there were two different stories of Genesis, like a back-to-back pages, and why the Nephilim were not mentioned anything about giants, and until 500 years later in what might have been fan fiction, might have been canon. But you talking about the metallurgy got me on this in the Bronze Age on that. So I think where I want to start is not actually a Shroud of Turin, but I don't want to abandon it. I don't want to throw the Shroud out. I want to hear the things where you ended up siding with iconoclasty.
Yeah, well, that's a long story. So I also, like you, kind of started off more like Fox Mulder, and then I ended up like 20 years down the road in this career. I end up a little bit more like Dana Scully, and that now I'm a lot harder to get on your bandwagon. When I was a sort of a young early 20s hippie kid, I had a lot more patience for certain, so how should we say, wild and woolly ideas, and I still have patience for them in the sense that I'm not a snob. I'd like to talk to anybody about anything as long as it's civil and respectful. I'm not declaring any topic off limit, but I no longer sort of have quite the degree of open-mindedness that I once had. But getting back to your question, where does my work push the envelope? Well, in the 20th century, I think that the pendulum had really swung too far against some of the stuff related to traveling in the ancient world. So there was a long period of time in the 19th century and the early 20th century where everyone assumed that everything came from the ancient Near East and spread everywhere else. So, like, if you read early 20th century anthropology, like Fraser's The Golden Bough, or other works like that, these were the giants of comparative anthropology 150 years ago. Those folks were of the opinion that everything came from Egypt and Mesopotamia. And if you found something that was advanced, technological, architecturally advanced, anything that looked like complex civilization, state-level society, if you found that on any continent, anywhere in the world, then it was exported from Egypt or from the Fertile Crescent via boats, and that so they just assumed that pyramids in Mesoamerica were related to pyramids in Egypt and things like that. That it was like this ancient pyramid building culture. So that's the funny thing. The ironic part is that, yeah, Graham Hancock's chronology is wrong, and that he's pushing it back to the Pleistocene. So that's a little weird, but Graham Hancock is not actually pushing a new idea. He's resurrecting a very old idea. He's resurrecting what was kind of closer to standard view of the academics in the time before the rise of scientific archaeology, when archaeology was a little bit more like myth-making and storytelling, and a little less empirical in its approach. So what happened is, in the late 20th century, you had this thing called the New Archaeology, and it was like championed by folks like Louis Binford, and it's pushing against this older cultural historical model. And the cultural historical model is the one that allowed this sort of long distance diffusion and assumed that all these cultures are related to each other. Binfordian processualism, or the New Archaeology, which is coming around in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that's the kind of archaeology that was saying no. It called bullshit on all this, we now might call hyper-diffusionism. Diffusion refers to the way that like technologies and cultures spread between continents, between regions and areas, the way different like languages and tribal groups will like export their own tech. They'll bring you'll bring metallurgy with you as you migrate around on your little horses and with your little wagons, and you say, here's how to make a sword, and then other people start making swords and it spreads. So diffusion happens, but that sort of notion that diffusion was everywhere and explained everything, it gets thrown out and just discarded in the late 20th century. And so scientific archaeology in the 80s and 90s went too far in the other direction, in my opinion. So you ask where I have been pushing the envelope the other way. It's that I am saying, wait, no, just because we don't claim that everything is coming from Egypt or Mesopotamia doesn't mean that the rise of imperial state-level societies that take over entire continents 3,000 years ago, that they don't have cultural effects that you see elsewhere, right? So my position is that the truth is in the middle, right? The extreme diffusion views of the old days were wrong because they were unidirectional. They only went one way. It was always from, like the advance of white Western civilization. It was very racist, very Eurocentric. It assumed everything was originated from the most highly evolved people, and the lesser evolved people were like recipients. Like there's a one-way donation gradient, right, of technology and culture out of the places, these central places where everything starts. And so what I do in my work is I question that narrative, and I say, wow, it's actually a lot of little people in between, a lot of small-scale societies all over the world that are instrumental in transmitting these great ideas, these new cultural developments, these new forms of social complexity, things like state-level society, where you're building like large-scale settlements, technologically advanced paradigms. Things like metallurgy, yeah, they do diffuse. They get out of the box, like Pandora's box gets open, and warfare and all these cultural changes happen and they spread around. But it's not because they're getting like spread by the conspiracy of the Illuminati giants or whatever. It's much simpler than that. It's the little tiny non-literate peoples, the small scale, and the people that we dismiss as culturally impoverished, as having no advanced culture. It's them who are actually doing the work of exchanging these, like the DNA of these different civilizations, if that makes sense. And so my work looks particularly at the North, like one of the areas. I'm actually interested in a number of different paths of diffusion between continents in the ancient world. But what I did my PhD work on is the North Pacific Rim as a highway for the transmission of advanced weapons technology during the last 3,000 years, and Western North America as a place that has been transformed in that time into a place with large-scale villages, advanced forms of warfare. Like it's not a coincidence that the last 2,000 years is when you have what we'll consider to be similar to Neolithic cultural complexity as far north as Alaska, right? The coastal villages of Alaska that become massive fortified structures with people engaged in bow and arrow warfare with with armor and they're doing hot forged copper metallurgy. This, in my view, is a function of their connection to a Pacific Rim cultural system. And so they're not an alien planet separate from Eurasia, but are a part of a population system that goes clear around the northern hemisphere. And you can see cultural patterns in Western Europe and in Alaska that are shared, right? Like there's no isolated part of humanity in that zone during that time period. That's where my work is like different than many scholars who are my colleagues.
Was the water level much shallower back then? I mean, I know they're like Doggerland and Sunderland,
and that's kind of where I'm coming from, because the conventional view of the Binfordian processionalists is that the Americas were independent of the Old World as a result of Pleistocene climate change. You get the Bering land bridge is inundated by the glacial meltwater after the terminal Pleistocene. You get the massive ice sheets in the northern hemisphere disappear. The sea levels rise, and all of a sudden you can't walk between Siberia and Alaska anymore. Oh my goodness! Now the continents are separated, and you have no more connection. That fails to note that the population systems never became separated by that event. They are not separated today, right? The joke was during the Cold War that that CIA agents who were Yupik or Inuit, they're called Inuit in Siberia and Yupik in Alaska. These are Inuit cousins, like Eskimo in the colloquial sense. That Inuits in Siberia were CIA agents, and Inuits and Yupiks in Alaska were KGB agents, right. And they were all members of the same extended family, and they would kayak back and forth and exchange state secrets during the Cold War. This was because, the international dateline, Russia, one of the Aleutian Islands was in Russia, and the next one over in the island chain was in the United States. The economy of that region was always based on kayaking and fur seal trade, and like the Mongol Empire demanded 1 million fur seal pelts as tribute. Think about that. Where are they getting that? This is a Central Asian polity that's one of the largest empires in world's history, and they're demanding millions of fur seal pelts as tribute. That means that they're integrated with the fur trade economy of the North Pacific.
Oh, see, I thought the high desert Gobi seal extinction was explained by that.
Yeah, no, it's because they didn't conquer Japan, but they tried to. But they most certainly conquered Manchuria, and you go north of Manchuria, you get to like the Amur Delta, and you get up into near the Kamchatka Peninsula, and that's all peripheral to the great Eurasian world empires of the last 3,000 years. And you look at the genetics of that region, and you see these populations are all related closely. And so like the Neo-Siberian reindeer pastoralists that took over the region, they kind of covered up what we would call likely Paleo-Siberian languages that would have been spoken there, more than 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. You go back into the Bronze Age, and you would have found different languages in that region that are not spoken there today. And some of those languages that are now extinct may have been close relatives of Native American languages. And that's where my dissertation work deals with a family called Dene-Yeniseian, which it's a language family that has relatives from Western Siberia to Arizona. Right. So this is a massive zone of culturally integrated groups, like that are part of the same, let's say the opposite sides of the world, but they speak related languages. They have similar economies, right? So it's kind of like the Irish in Boston versus the Irish in Ireland.
Ireland, right? In Ireland, yeah. So right, but they never forgot their cousins. They still kept in touch with their cousins. They still did business with their cousins.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. They don't necessarily have like cell phones. Don't get me wrong. I'm not claiming that they're directly connected like that, but they certainly had oral traditions. You can look at the earliest anthropological records from the 18th century, the Mackenzie expedition up into Western Canada, where the Mackenzie River was named. every time they asked these people where they came from originally, they said, "Oh, we used to live in Asia." That was a common thing they heard from people in early ethnography, and then in the 20th century, they said that was all bullshit. It's like the early anthropologists in the United States started to say that those were just myths. Why? Because they were interested in a theory of human development in the Western Hemisphere that was independent from the old world, so they could use it as like a laboratory to test social theory. So, right, in other words, like from a scientific perspective, they wanted these to be an uncontaminated sample of primordial humans that don't have any like family connection to the old world, and you can therefore use them as an independent witness or corroboration of some kind of social theory that's not just a product of history.
Oh,
right?
So it was a social theory thing. It wasn't.
It's social. Yeah. So it's social theory so that's where I'm saying that I'm pushing back and bringing back culture history. So cultural history that was the old kind of Eurocentric racist cultural history of the 20th century. Yeah, it's good that went by the wayside. But then processualism, which was very much the opposite, it threw the baby out with the bathwater. So my career has been interested in resurrecting where those big historical connections between far distant peoples, where those data have been ignored. And that's why those white Indians and the red-headed giants people, they bother me because they're pissing. Pardon me. Are we allowed to cuss? I was going to say they're pissing in my pool, right? Or I'm pissing in theirs, depending on your perspective. But it's like I want to separate the wheat from the chaff when you have credible arguments for, say, long-distance ocean voyages in the ancient world versus the much more common case of having incredible ones that are like wild and crazy, suggesting that this or that group sailed here or there, like the Book of Mormon and stuff.
Right. Yeah, the Book of Mormon, that could probably be its own show, and it probably should be. A bit ago, you said a language group, and one was Dene. I think we all have learned Dene in the last 20 years or so, whether you're watching Dark Winds or Reservation Dogs or whatever. We know you're not supposed to say Navajo, you're supposed to say Dene, and all. The first word you said sounded a little bit like Deniso, and I was wondering if it was related to Denisovan, which is an extinct,
Denisovans are that's biological anthropology, human paleontology. They're an extinct cousin species. No, the term is Dene. Yeah, it is. You're right. It's the same. And that's, by the way, the Dene peoples, they all have that word Dene for human. So it's not just the Navajo or the people that are the Navajo who call themselves Dene. Properly speaking, are the Dene. It's not just the southwestern Dene, which we call the Apacheans or the southern Athabascans, they're sometimes called. It's their cousins in Canada and Alaska, which is where they came from. So the original, the people, the heartland of the Dene is not Arizona and New Mexico. That's just where the most famous members of the family reside. The heartland of the Dene is the western interior subarctic. So you go up to central Alaska, western interior Canada, right?
So the original American snowbirds are...
Yeah, a little bit along the northwest coast. So and down into California. There's some northern California groups that are a member of this family, a little bit in Oregon and Washington, and then you get up into British Columbia, and then that's where it really takes off. So that the space between British Columbia and central Alaska and over to Hudson's Bay, that's a little bit in Alberta there too. That's where and Saskatchewan, that's the whole family's kind of original homeland is there. And they're related to a group called Yeniseian or Ket, which resides way, way, way over in central Siberia or west central Siberia, north central Asia, in the Yenisei River drainage, north of Lake Baikal and everywhere. So that's a long way away. We're talking like 8,000 miles separated. And you say, wow, how do you go from there here to there? And my answer is that 3,000 years ago, it wasn't just stuck in a far corner of Western Siberia. 2,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, it's likely that Yeniseian language family was really widespread throughout North Central Asia. So, like, if you were to go back in time, get a TARDIS, are you a Doctor Who fan?
I know what it is.
Hop in your time machine and go back to 500 AD or 700 AD and get out in the region of between Mongolia and Northeast Asia, somewhere in that sort of like vast tundra zone there. That's a place. Those are places where Neo-Siberian reindeer pastoralists took over since then and brought their herds of reindeer, and where there are no Paleo-Siberian languages today. But within the last 2,000 years, it is likely that one of the major languages of Siberia was in this Yeniseian family, which now only survives as a tiny, like, relict population in Western Siberia. And if you recognize, and why is that? Because the famous group of people called the Huns, like Attila's group,
right,
they might have spoken Yeniseian. That's the latest linguistic theory, like a very current linguistic theory, is the Yeniseian was the original language of the Hun Empire. So the Huns being Yeniseians, then you remember the Huns owned North China 2,000 years ago. It was Hun territory. This is not an obscure little Siberian group. And this is where I get to what I was saying about people we dismiss as being culturally impoverished, people we dismiss as being backwards, uncivilized. They're actually the ones that are implicated in some of the great cultural transformations of ancient history. And that's where my work is challenging the status quo. It's not saying the Egyptians were, sitting in Egypt. They weren't Russian. They weren't engaged in massive incursions into different territories the way that, the small scale societies of the North were doing.
Yeah, I mean, they tried a couple times. They got head off by the Hittites and the Assyrians.
That's right. Yeah. No, of course, that's what. My point isn't that the empires of the ancient Near East weren't doing that. Actually, I said that, but I didn't mean that.
But they didn't transmit their technology to the Americas.
Or if they did, they needed a bunch of little intermediaries to get there. So I talked about weapons technology.
They need a Silk Road of their own, to get there.
Yeah. So where do these, like, the weapons that I'm talking about are things like advanced forms of archery technology. So if you know the recurved composite bow, the short bow, it's like
of course, who doesn't? Yeah,
the recurved composite bow, it appears in ancient West Asia in the Bronze Age. Where does it go from there? It leaves ancient West Asia and it moves into North Central Asia. Then it goes from North Central Asia, it goes to Northeast Asia. Where does it go after it goes to Northeast Asia? It goes to Alaska. So in some sense, it is the same. It's the same technological cultural complex, but it's not contained by a single ethnic unit. It's rather goes viral in humanity at large.
Yeah, it's a couple of great books. I'm sure there's a bunch of them, but I read one. I'll have the order, but it was like the horse, the wagon, and the wheel, and then
the horse. The horse, the wheel, and the horse, the wheel, and language by David Anthony.
That was great.
It's a great book, and he's a great scholar. Somebody who gave me support when I was writing my dissertation 15 years ago. He was a good informal. I wrote a lot to various great scholars like him when I was working on my dissertation. So my work isn't exactly famous because I've been a teaching scholar, and I haven't had a chance to. I haven't had a tenure track job, which means that I've mostly been teaching undergraduates to make ends meet for 20 years, and not I don't have a big book out there that is pushing my ideas, but someday I'm working on some articles and collaborating with some scholars overseas, and so I'll keep you posted when my new work comes out on the subject that I'm talking about here.
Yeah, please do. I'll say I knew you went, and now I have been good luck for other people. I've also been bad luck for other people,
Oh,
and
sure.
I've been not much luck for myself. So, but for other people, it's more good luck than bad luck.
I'll provide you with a link to an article, a linguistics article that deals with the words for metal weapons, like metal knives, and the words for advanced archery tools that are shared between the particular languages in question, and how that can be used to help explain the success of these particular groups in Alaska.
That's probably one of the most practical things. Like, right, the things that describe food, clothes, and weapons is probably some of them, and women, marriage. All right, so let's do some debunking of some of the things that piss in your pool. White Indians, red air giants. Let's hit
the red air giants. So let me give a shout out to Andy White. Andy White Archaeology, or Nobody Listens to Andy. He's got a small YouTube channel. You can check out some of his work on the giants. So I'm going to probably be influenced a little bit by him in my recap of this topic. Okay. But let's just do it in a nutshell. Much of the giants stuff comes after the famous Cardiff Giant hoax, when essentially an atheist wants to make fun of his acquaintance who's a fundamentalist preacher, and shows how silly they are, and he carves a big giant statue and buries it in a manure pile, and it gets dug up by his cousin, and it ends up being so financially successful. This is where P.T. Barnum's apocryphal quote, "A sucker born every minute," comes from, because it turns out that this thing that was just supposed to make fun of a dumb creationist, it ends up being so profitable because there's so many people lining up to pay to see this. 50 cents a pop. 50 cents was a lot of money back then. Right? To touch and view this giant fake stone statue giant, that they didn't reveal it was a fake for a long time. They decided to make money off of it for a while before they finally said, "Oh, it's fake." But this spawned a kind of a whole era in giant hunting. Lots of fake mummies that were altered to look like giants. Lots of yellow journalism. A lot of disreputable newspaper articles in the early 20th century, which purported to find giants here or there. So one of the things that you see 20th century and 21st century giant hunters talking about is that these giants allegedly had double rows of teeth. Have you ever heard this before?
Yes, and since polydactyl, 6 fingers and 6 toes, and 2 rows of teeth, like an alien.
2 rows of teeth. Now, the reason this is funny when you hear about it, the 2 rows of teeth thing is extremely stupid. And the reason why it's stupid is it's because it's an artifact of the fact that people reading old sources don't understand the basics of the 19th century English dialect that these sources were written in. So it's 20th century people who are unfamiliar with idioms in 19th century English, reading 19th century English archaeological reports, and getting confused, and then translating them into 20th century idioms, and that's where you get the 2 rows of teeth. Because what it is a lot of old mummies and old bones that are described by the Smithsonian in their reports say double teeth all around, top and bottom. They say this is a common note for skeletons in archaeological reports in the old days. Why? What did that mean? Double teeth is a way of talking about your molars. So you've got your single tooth are your incisors. Then you got your canines, and then behind them in 19th century English, they would call those your double teeth.
Got it.
What happens when you wear your incisors down to the point where they lose the enamel on the top? Your single tooth turns into what was colloquially referred to as a double tooth. So someone who had very bad teeth in the front had double teeth all around. So a middle-aged skeleton of a person who had a diet full of rocks and seeds, because people who ate agriculturalists, farmers who ate grain-rich meant that they were eating sand too. And that sand, your whole life, by the time you're middle-aged, your teeth have worn down from the sand in your bread. And so you end up with a lot of people who die of advanced age have double teeth all around. And this was written in common parlance in the archaeological reports. And then 20th century idiots who didn't understand what that meant assumed it was some kind of alien, some sort of like anatomical difference from regular humans, when it
like
just
sharks with rows and rows of teeth.
Yes, exactly. It just means that you're old and you've got your teeth worn down. So that's the first point. The second point is a zombie lie from a book by Sarah Winnemucca. Sarah Winnemucca wrote a book called Life Among the Paiute in the 19th century. So this is, if you're familiar with the Paiute, they're one of the Uto-Aztecan groups of the Great Basin. And they, so the Great Basin culture area in Western North America is where Uto-Aztecans lived, and there are some Pueblo groups like the Hopi, who are neighbors of the Dene. They're, the Mesoamerican groups like the Aztec. They're all originating within this sort of like Uto-Aztecan cultural area. This is why, like, the Aztec origin myth says that they came from Arizona, if you're familiar with that. So that
I knew they came from north. I didn't know.
Right, yeah. So the original Uto-Aztecan people were probably part of this New Mexico expansion out of, like, part of California was maybe where they originated, and they spread out through the Death Valley into the Great Basin at large. So in Sarah Winnemucca she was a famous Paiute woman who wrote an eloquent book about her life among the Paiute. And it's like one of the quintessential ethnographies by a member of the group that we have from the 19th century. So it's a classic, important book in Native American literature and a great historical source that people should just generally read and know, because it's, like one of those, like Mark Twain or any other foundational work in American literature. Life Among the Paiute it's important. But what does she do in this book? She also talks about her ancestors fighting cannibalistic enemies who lived in a cave, and that these cannibalistic enemies that lived in a cave, they were killed. They eventually get hunted and killed by the Paiute so that they don't get eaten by them anymore. And then those enemies get their scalps turned into trophies, and those trophy scalps get integrated into heirloom blankets. And Sarah Winnemucca says, and I have one of these heirloom blankets. Like, I own a blanket that has a fringe on it that's made out of the scalp of one of these legendary cannibalistic enemies from ancient times. Right. And they had red hair. And I'm saying this because my blanket has red hair on the fringe. So that's where the whole notion of red-haired giants come from. So there's several problems here. Oh, and by the way, my dissertation research included material from Lovelock Cave, because one possible theory, and it's not proven, but it's possible, is that the ancestors of the Navajo and the Apache, or the Dene peoples, were migrating down to Arizona from the north, and that they may have been one of the groups that was living at a place called Lovelock Cave, which is probably where Sarah Winnemucca is talking about Lovelock Cave in her account. So it may be that early ancestral Apachean peoples related to the Navajo and Apache, or the Dene, are living in Lovelock, and they are potentially in conflict with the Paiute, and they no longer live there. It's no longer Apache or Navajo or Dene territory, but it's now Ute territory because they get defeated and etc. And the fact that they're called cannibals, that's common. Enemies are always cannibals, right? Yeah. Like the bad guys are cannibals. That's just very standard idea,
Cannibals and eat babies.
Right, yeah. So whether or not they were actually cannibals, I forget if there is archaeological evidence for cannibalism in the New World, of course, but sure. I forget precisely whether there is in that case or not, whether the cannibalism part of her story has any corroboration. I can't recall that off the top of my head.
Yeah, somebody somewhere was eating somebody, or wouldn't have made it into every myth and been the boogeyman in every world.
So the reason why I studied material from that cave, artifacts from Lovelock Cave, were analyzed in my dissertation because it includes some of the oldest evidence for the sinew-backed bow in North America. And I've told you that my view is that the Dene peoples were instrumental in the transmission of that technology to the Western North American antiquity. So the arrival of Dene people from the north would have come with this new weapon technology that we indeed do find in that cave. You got me? So that's why it's of interest to my legitimate work there. But
you're following the bow, and the bow inevitably got you to the story.
Right. Yeah. So the bow got into the story, and that's where I started getting into this. But here's the issue: Sarah Winnemucca never calls them giants, not once. But this is a zombie citation. There's a phenomenon where things get popularly misquoted and then commonly cited. So the idea that she was talking about giant people, giant bad guys, which all the fundamentalists now think that the Nephilim or the biblical giants were referred to by Sarah Winnemucca in her Life Among the Paiute, they're not actually reading the book. They're just quoting other people citing it. And in the secondary sources, the cannibals in Winnemucca's account become giants. And then they just get called giants by everyone, and they attribute that citation to her, but it's bullshit. I hate that. But those zombie citations are very common, where people commonly cite secondary sources that misrepresent primary sources, and that's where the giant stuff comes in. It's through like this game of telephone with the book.
Well, what's the magic about the red hair? Is it that hair rust? Is it that people buried in red ochre? Is it just blood? What?
That's the third thing here, and this is the key. People who have black hair, when their hair gets aged in exposure to ultraviolet light, the melanin breaks down in the black hair and turns red. So Sarah Winnemucca's red-fringed heirloom blanket with red-fringed human hair, that was likely originally dark hair, just like any Native American, and that by the time she inherited it, 150, 200, 300 years later, whatever how old it was no longer red. It was no longer black. It had turned red. And you know this when you look at like Egyptian mummies. Look at Ramses the Great. Look at, I forget, some of them might have been naturally red-haired, but for the most part, mummies often have red hair, and you do DNA testing on them, and it's only sometimes is their red hair actually red hair. It is often hair that has changed color because of age.
Okay, so they've oxidized or whatever the proper word would be for hair.
Yeah. I forget the chemical process, but the melanin that makes hair dark becomes broken down. Yeah.
So it should not surprise us that people who are essentially Asians who have migrated over thousands of years, yes, pretty much, I don't know, I'm sure it's not 100%, but somewhere close to 100% of Asians have very dark hair.
Right. So. And this is not to say that because of gene flow or mutations, because the fact is that all light skin and light hair is relatively recent and superficial mutations in evolutionary terms. The dominant form of human complexion, both eyes, hair, and skin. Eyes, hair, and skin are all dark originally. They all turn light. And that lightening of human eyes, hair, and skin happens in particular places at particular times because of mutations that just sort of like break the melanin genes, right? So I'm a very pasty white Irish American, and my melanin genes don't work, and so therefore I get sunburned easily. But you can see gene flow of those various regional skin lightening throughout the world, and indeed you don't see too many people in Asia who have different hair color, eye color, skin color, but you do see some. So you go to Western Mongolia and you find Mongolians with blonde hair and blue eyes. So I do not, and they're 100% Mongolian. They're not because they don't have a German father.
They're not proof of elves or Polarians who came down to live
they
among us.
They actually are really just Mongolian people with blonde hair and blue eyes because of ancient Scythians, or there were that those blue-eyed blonde-haired genes are in the same northern Eurasian population system, and so through gene flow they can make it out of Europe and into Asia without like a direct like enclave of European migrants.
We all came from mitochondrial Eve, at least as far as we know. And haven't they meaning closer to you than me, they have traced like the original like 10 or so like blue-eyed ancestors of everybody who has blue eyes now, like came from
it's probably everyone who has blue eyes in Europe, because that's a particular form. So skin color and eye color and hair color are weird in the sense that everyone originally had dark hair. Or dark melanin genes. The way that they become lighter is through breaking those melanin genes in ways that can be idiosyncratic. They don't always break the same way. So like when you see blue eyes in Polynesia, which you do, those are different blue eyes than the blue eyes you see in Scandinavia.
Those were all caused by crystal gal and heartbreak.
I mean, or just because they're caused by a slightly different mutation in the melanin gene, which causes the same effect. The same thing is true with red-haired Neanderthals. Neanderthals that had red hair had the same genes caused red hair in Neanderthals and modern humans, but the breaks, the way that those genes have been disabled to produce red hair, the specific point breaks in the genetic code are different for Neanderthals versus moderns. What's interesting is that they both lived in the same place. Right. This suggests that there's an evolutionary fact that's selecting for red-haired people when they live in a certain part of Europe, and it happens more than once independently, once in pre-modern and once in modern humans. So there may be we don't understand the evolution of skin color and hair color as humans migrate around, but we do think that there are some factors which must influence it.
I'm sure for you. I saw something, and it was relatively recently that like something like 7,000 years ago, everybody had very dark skin, everybody had very blue eyes and long dark hair.
The European hunter-gatherers you're talking about. You're talking about before the ancient Near Eastern farmers showed up in Western Europe. So the early European hunters and gatherers, they had they developed blue eyes, but they were still very swarthy. So if you saw them, so Europeans before the Neolithic would have been dark complected, but some of them had blue eyes. Later, ancient Near Eastern farmers brought light skin, and then the two populations merged. And when the Neolithic came to Europe, and then the later Bronze Age also had the same, or accelerated this. There was more violence in the Bronze Age, but you end up getting the traits of the earlier hunter-gatherers mixed with the later farmers, and that's why the hair color and the eye color kind of joined together.
You get it. They got their peanut butter and the chocolate, and they got the marshmallow and the chocolate and the marshmallow and the peanut butter and the lime and the coconut, and then we shook it up and we went woo-woo.
You're picking up what I'm laying down, man.
So, I mean, some of them were men and women who fell in love with each other a lot, and some of them were rapey and slavey, and some of them were traded back and forth, and and just like in Days of Our Lives in 1985, some relationships started rapey and turned into love. I mean,
Well, actually, so the genetics. I mean, this is getting kind of heavy, man. This is getting kind of heavy. But
I brought in Days of Our Lives. It was unprofessional. I'm sorry.
No. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm saying that it's tough. We've got a lot of trauma. There's also a lot of murder and a lot of warfare, a lot of death. But what I'll say that's surprising, really recent studies that have shown, like just come out in the last couple of years, is they're showing that it looks like the Neolithic was a period when the women were really running things, and there was a lot of debate about this for a long time, but So the early farming cultures were times when the woman's family was the sort of like the homestead. Like there was, in hunter-gatherers, it's not so much. Hunter-gatherers tend to be male-oriented. They're migratory people that hunting, and then once agriculture gets invented, so the first farmers look like they were organized their households around women, around these like matriarchs, like the big women were the rulers of society, and they determined property, inheritance, and all that. And we can see their genetic legacy from the archaeological period that in question, like to do the DNA tests and connect the dots. And it also looks like they taught men how to grow crops, so that when the ancient Near Eastern farming people, so they left West Asia, the Levant is where the original farmers came from, and they spread all over Western Europe. And they merged with those early swarthy, blue-eyed. So think about one of your romance novels, right? Like these. There's
so many to choose from.
Yeah. It was the farming ladies of of West Asia that taught the hunting men of Europe how to settle down and live in houses and stuff like that. And so
it's just like Homelander, not Homelander. What's Outlander? It's just like Outlander. Except 7,000 years early.
Yeah. And so that was what's interesting is it wasn't super violent yet.
Homelander.
But what we call that is sexually asymmetrical founder effect. It means that people don't always migrate the same, whether they're one gender or another. In certain societies, you may have cultural tendencies for men to move around more than women, or women to move around more than men, and that changes over time. And in different particular cultures, and so that results in the peanut butter and the chocolate and the marshmallows getting handed out in different ways over time. Then, and this is something else I study the warfare stuff and the weapons technology and the inhumanity. That's where it kind of goes sideways, is in the Bronze Age and later, when you have this like the institution of warfare, which has not always been with us. It rises up and it takes a big chunk out of the earlier diversity. So you don't have the same survival of those ancient families that we were talking about. A lot of them were done dirty by the later metallurgical peoples who took advantage of their weapons to get what you said was rapey and slavey and all that. So
and of course they were bestowed with their gifts by the gods who favored them, and their gods became the pantheons of everyone in one form or another. Perhaps I'm sure that's a gross oversimplification.
It is. But my point or I should say my perspective is that we should be able to envision a better future, a future without as much violence, a future with more justice, when we recognize that people were doing pretty well without that stuff for a long time, right? You go back far enough, and it's not like those Neolithic people weren't living in big fancy houses. They did. They had big villages with large ceremonial centers, and they were like Göbekli Tepe and these places. These were Neolithic and early, proto-Neolithic groups that were developing the ability to live together at scale. And they did that without killing each other. And so I think we today need to remember that it's possible. Like that's the one lesson I want my students to walk away with, is that we can do it.
They killed each other at times. It just wasn't this institutional killing.
Yeah, it wasn't. I'm not saying that there was never a murder. I'm not saying that there was never violence or revenge feuding. We know that small scale societies can be violent, and I'm not pretending that peaceful hunter gatherers are always going to be like living in the Garden of Eden. No, don't get me wrong. I'm talking about the scale of the violence that results from certain technological paradigm shifts. Anyway,
being a policy choice, so to mobilize a society. Okay, so in that you touched on two things. So two things mummies. The other Göbekli Tepe. I'm sure I pronounced it wrong. There were things to bunk and debunk. So you can pick the order. It's up to you.
Oh, lots of things to. Oh, did you want to talk about the alien mummies in Peru, or did you want to talk about?
Sure. You have me at aliens.
That's one of the things that I've gotten roped into on social media, and I haven't yet. Followed through with it, but I'm sort of building up.
By the way, I don't care where the alien mummies are. The answer is yes.
Okay. So I'm kind of building up a bit of an Avengers team of similarly minded iconoclastic scholars and who are interested in protecting archaeological heritage from grave robbers. Okay. So let me tell you a story about looting and pseudo-archaeology misrepresentation of the past. So the Andes in South America, we're dealing with like the Peruvian Andes and the coastal part of southern Peru. So these are pre-Inca civilizations. The Inca are one of the cradles of urban civilization in the world, right? It's South America's first urban empire, and it's right just pre-contact is when the Inca are taking off, right before it all goes sideways when the Europeans show up. But so you go back to the early part of the Common Era, and you have the pre-Inca, the rise of headhunting aristocrats. So there's a lot of trophy heads, a lot of human sacrifice in the religion of South America. And the aristocrats did a lot of the cranial deformation, so they had cradle boarding of the babies, and if you had a bullet-shaped kind of cone head, sort of like Dan Aykroyd in the Coneheads movie, if you had this bullet-shaped head, it meant you were high class.
Right. That was the fashion.
And if you're a high-class person, you also get a mummification burial. You don't just get your bones don't turn to dust. You get wrapped up in a beautiful blanket. You get lots of fancy jewelry and ceramic objects attached to your beautiful mummy bundle, and you get set in a little tomb that's carved out of an arid hillside in this sort of southern Peruvian era. So you get in this sort of high arid landscape, and it naturally mummifies you. So if you get wrapped in a blanket and tucked inside of a little niche outside of the weather, you're not in direct exposure to the elements, that it's so arid that you don't have to do like the Egyptians did. You don't have to take your organs out and put them in special jars, because in the Nile Delta, it's like a lot more muggier, right? We could think of that the Nile Delta is a place where if you don't take a lot of embalming steps, that mummification is not going to go so smooth, right? But in the Andes, they can mummify you just by wrapping you in a blanket and leaving you in the exposure. So these are just no embalming necessary. These mummies get tucked into these places, and sometimes you get mummification of trophy heads, like these are the decapitations of human sacrifice that are then kept, and you see a lot of the iconography of these like sun gods holding a bunch of trophy heads. So you got this development of complex Inca religion and all their iconography, and these iconographies are connected to the burials that we're talking about. Well, in the 20th century, looters realized that they could sell the blankets and the ceramics and the gold and the copper, because this is an incipient New World Bronze Age culture. They're developing their own bronze metallurgy in this urban empire. That's like the theory of the rise of urban civilization, is that it is connected to metallurgy and all that stuff. And so the looters have got, as archaeologists are starting to show off these fabulous things, the looters are starting to steal the valuables and sell them on the international art market. So you see Peruvian textiles, and you see Peruvian jewelry and Peruvian ceramics in museum collections. There is a non-zero chance that some of those were sold on the black market or the gray market in the time before the UNESCO conventions of 1970, and even after that. But then since that time, you title wash, you make fake papers if you're trying to sell looted antiquities internationally. So it's still a huge problem. What does this leave? This leaves naked people. Naked mummies left over without their blankets, without their fancy jewelry, without their beautiful painted ceramic, emblems and pottery. What can you do with that? Let's think about this. So around the 2010s, Ancient Aliens gets really popular globally.
Sure does.
And the same cartels that do things like ship coca paste through through the jungle to the ports, where it gets turned in laboratories in the Brazilian ports into cocaine that gets shipped off to England. Those same cartels are also the ones that are trafficking in looted antiquities from archaeological sites around World Heritage sites, like the Nazca Paracas site in Peru, which is where the famous Nazca lines that are featured in Ancient Aliens come from.
Right.
You get me?
Yep.
And those Nazca lines, which are supposed to be what, according to Von Daniken or whoever, the Ancient Aliens people, they're supposed to be
the airport.
The airport for the.
And those are the landing lights, because UFOs need guides. They don't have navigational equipment of their own.
And then 1,200 miles away in Colombia, there's some little gold trinkets that look like, that are probably birds, but they look kind of like airplanes. Mm-hmm. So evidently those are what the airplanes were that would have landed on the runways. So because
all you need are the occupants of those airplanes and the air traffic controllers of those airplanes. And so E.T. was probably getting around that time. So instead of E.T. phoning home, it was the E.T.'s already here, and we can start selling E.T.
And start selling ETs. So they have these same looters and traffickers in stolen antiquities now have a glut of naked mummies that are left over from their ransacking and pillaging operations. And you go to old tombs that have already been looted, you might find the corpses still inside, even if you don't find the valuables. What they realized that they could do, and this is really sick and ghoulish, in my humble opinion, is you can take them to a quack taxidermist. You can take them to somebody who will use a rehydration solution on their extremities and then perform a bit of surgery, remove some bones, rearrange some bones, and all of a sudden you have a 3-fingered alien being known as the tridactyl mummies of Nazca. And these are then dipped. So after they've been rehydrated, they have to be re-dehydrated, and then you paint them in this white paste of diatomaceous earth, which kind of covers up any of the irregularities, because as you imagine, there's going to be places where you've got maybe some seams, some glue overlapping pieces of skin that you kind of put back together to make it look like this creature naturally has only 3 fingers. And these are indeed allegedly the maybe pilots of those spaceships that would have landed on the Nazca lines. Now, try operating spaceship controls without opposable thumbs.
Well, they have the giant brains that could do it.
Telepathically?
Yeah,
except that they don't have giant brains, because that's the thing. These are just regular Peruvian. No, they do have cone heads, because that's from artificial cranial modification, but there's a lot of misinformation about the size of their brains. Most of the literature that claims they're abnormally large, most of them are using non-standard cephalometry. They're not right. They're because the way that we calculate brain volume is based on a constellation of landmarks that are normal for non-modified skull. When you modify a skull, guess what happens to the landmarks that you use to calculate cranial volume? Those landmarks get stretched and contorted. They move around.
So it's like when you get silly putty and you stretch the silly putty, but instead of measuring the same volume, you are extrapolating the volume of the original shape of the silly putty, but leaving it stretched, so that now it's
You got
4
it.
times bigger or whatever.
Yeah, so when people then take standard cephalometric calculations and they input the variables from someone with an artificially modified cranium, then they'll say, oh, look, their brain is 40% larger than a normal human brain, but they're not actually directly measuring cranial volume. They're doing it with a mathematical trick, right? And that is why it never passes peer review. These are always claims that are made in the alternative archaeological literature that are made by people who are half-baked in their approach. If you directly measure cranial volume with, like, I don't know, you can do 3D modeling. There's lots of ways that you can calculate the actual volume of the skull. Guess what? You find out these human skulls from Peru are human skulls from Peru, whatever their shape happens to be.
Okay, so no mummies that are true. All right, how about those great finds in Turkey there?
The what? What's that?
The tepes.
Oh, the you're asking about the Göbekli Tepe. Yeah. What about Göbekli Tepe? Is an awesome site which has become a hotbed for alternative archaeology speculation. So there's a lot of different things about Göbekli Tepe we could talk about. What is there a particular question you have about that wonderful location? Which is
I think that there are two. One is the one that's of the that people make a big deal of it. Whether it's true or not, I have no idea. But that it was intentionally buried after entire communities got together to put it together. Why would they do such a thing? The other would be if there is some sort of language or characters that mirror a zodiac or any symbology that we would recognize from a more recent culture, aside from maybe just, yeah, sure, there were still vultures and lions to, carve.
That's wonderful. Yeah, those are great couple of questions. Okay, so sorry, remind me of the first one again. I want to answer both of them.
Purposely what's the opposite of excavated?
Yeah.
Buried.
Yeah, so it does look like when so we call them special buildings, and that's these big monumental things with the T-pillars, and they're not unique to Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe is an early, large example that's in great condition. So it's special because it's in such good shape, right? It's more or less intact, whereas many of the similar sister sites in that region of the Tashtepler sites, which is like 100 or 200 square kilometers in that area, where during that period there were lots of similar forms of architecture in that space. And so a lot of those are not as spectacular and not in as good condition. So to be fair, Göbekli Tepe is not unique. It's just a very pristine and awesome case. So it is normal for societies of that period to occasionally deconsecrate a structure, we'll say. We don't call them temples exactly because we don't know exactly how they were used. They aren't necessarily like a strictly religious building for later. They might have been multi-use buildings that had secular and sacred functions mixed together. But it would have been pretty normal for when you decommission a structure like that to deliberately bury it. If it's a powerful place that has a lot of juju or whatever, a lot of intense power associated with it, then if you're not using it anymore, you might bury it, right?
But that is an ancient version of a planned demolition?
Yeah, sort of like not you don't demolish it, but you might bury it for that way, to kind of put it out of commission, to ceremonially.
Are there theories as to why they would put something out of commission? Did somebody lose a war and so other gods took over?
There is no war. War doesn't exist at that stage. Remember, war comes a lot later. So we don't think war, but these societies were occupying these places in some cases for very long periods of time, centuries and centuries upon end. And these structures get reused and adapted for different purposes. It's not just one phase and then it's destroyed. So for whatever reason they did it, it was not overnight. It would have been after a very, very long period of of use, and then eventually things change. So I don't think we can say for sure why, but that was my preamble to say that it's not unprecedented to bury structures like this. In the case of Göbekli Tepe, though, it looks like there is some natural subsidence, right? That there it's built into a hillside, I believe. So I've talked a little bit with Dr. Lee Clare, who's the head of excavations there, I believe. He's one of the high-ranking archaeologists on site.
Not Andrew Collins.
What's that?
Not Andrew Collins.
Andrew
Collins, Hugh Newman. They're the ones who are, I would say, you would call them the pseudo archaeologists.
Oh yeah. No, I don't know. There's lots of groups of alternative archaeologists that are obsessed with Göbekli Tepe, but right. I get my information from people who are a little more in the know from the site, and so they're saying that my understanding is that that there's some degree of natural subsidence of the hillside near the site that caused portions of the site to be buried naturally. And so there is still ongoing debate about whether that is ubiquitous across the whole site or whether there are portions of the site where it was buried deliberately. So the issue is not whether or not deliberate burial happened. It happened within related cultures in related regions, so it would be perfectly fine to say it was deliberately buried, but I believe that the current feelings are leaning towards natural subsidence, the slope of the hillside crashing into the space.
I suppose it could be both, right? I suppose it could be that there was
it could be a mixture. So like what happened?
Earthquake, landslide, half of it's buried there like
a space, and then you fill it in the rest of the way to make it into a new to establish a different sort of.
Otherwise, you're Planet of the Apes with only half of the Statue of Liberty sticking.
Yeah. So I don't know for sure where it's going to go from there. There's lots of new work coming out of there. It's like that's very commonly misrepresented as though the work there is slowing down or there's some sort of conspiracy to not excavate Göbekli Tepe. That is utter balderdash. It is like any major archaeological site. It gets excavated every summer. There is major work happening there. It's done slowly and carefully, as you would expect for a World Heritage Site. There is no such thing as a World Heritage Site where you clear cut and you just bring in bulldozers and dig the whole thing up in a day. That would be stupid. You have to do it right. It's going to be slow, but it's going to be done every year. There's going to be brand new revelations coming out of that. Okay,
don't you go slower as you get to the bottom, as you think you're getting to the bottom, so that you don't knock it over?
Yeah, you got to work. So there's definitely site stability. You have to shore up and stabilize every architectural feature you expose. It's now going to be exposed to. You also have to build shelter over the site so that it doesn't get weather on it that would accelerate its destruction. There's so many different factors there. So yeah, it's a multifaceted process. It is a complex series of decisions, and it's a lot of stakeholders. There's not one decision-making person. There's every level of government, from the local to the national. There's all of the different people who are involved. So yeah, the next question you asked was about the zodiac, and I suspect this is Pillar 13 you're talking about, the famous one that's got the scorpion on it.
Yeah, I'm a Scorpion, so of course I'm invested in this.
This is, I think, Martin Sweatman's theory. Remember, Martin Sweatman is not an archaeologist. I believe he is a physicist or an engineer at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland.
I love when scientists in different fields become famous in a field that's not at all their own.
It's really
I love Stephen Greer with the UFOs. And I was like, he's Harvard. It's like,
yeah. Or another one would be Barry Fell, who was one of the White Indians guys. He believed in the Irish Native Americans. Was Barry Fell? He's a Harvard marine biologist.
Right.
Obviously, the person you consult to translate ancient Irish glyphs.
Where are the beluga whales from? Answer me that.
Yeah, but anyway,
clearly from White Indians.
Yeah. but Mr. Sweatman or Dr. Sweatman's paper is not well respected by archaeologists. It did make it through peer review, the one where he talks about the zodiac stuff. The problem is that there's too much time to go from Göbekli Tepe, which is way before writing, right? Göbekli Tepe is like thousands of years before the invention of writing. The Babylonian and Greek astrological signs that are being compared with the stuff on this pillar, that's like thousands of years later, and there's really, really difficult to connect the dots between them.
Well, the stars would be in different places.
Maybe, I don't know about how many different, how far, you might be right. You'd have to just consult with astronomers to figure that out, and I'm not an astronomer, so
I'm also not sure if, even if you're looking at the same star clusters, that you'd see the same things. I mean, somebody made up stories and sort of jiggered the stars to, I mean, Scorpio wasn't always a Scorpio. My understanding is Scorpio was an eagle at some point, which again is of great consternation to me because I'm a Scorpio. I don't want to be an eagle.
So there's interesting. So what I'll say is that there's a lot of different cultural views about star signs. So depending on what culture you're in, you'll see completely different interpretations of particular signs. And so there's no basis to assume that the same animals in the zodiac were present at the time of Göbekli Tepe as were in later Babylonian and Greek models.
There's a pretty good chance those same animals were around, and they could probably kill you or took care of you or ate your dead or did something.
And that's what we say, and that's what the pillars at Göbekli Tepe actually show, is they show a lot of aggressive animals. So Göbekli Tepe was originally built by hunters and gatherers. Remember when I said that it's looking like a lot of women were in charge in the Neolithic? Göbekli Tepe is super early Neolithic, like pre-pottery Neolithic, like the very early part. And it looks like it may have been founded by people who were not yet farming. They would have still had a cultural value system that was hunters and gatherers. And we'll say that it's a very, phallogocentric. You have a lot of, like, the famous statues of men holding their genitals.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
This is one of the cultural patterns that you see all over the region. You see it in a lot of these related sites.
Right, Albundiism, the original religion.
Right. So you have the man holding his genitals, is one of the features. And what else do you have? You see a lot of aggressive animals hunting. You see foxes leaping after their prey. You see scorpions. You see these animals that are dangerous. So that suggests that maybe different special buildings were associated with different clans or different secret societies, different hunting societies, groups of people that would use that building that were united under the banner of a single animal, for example. So your scorpion pillar, I'm not an expert enough to talk about this, but it's much more likely to place the particular predator animals and dangerous animals that we see depicted in the architecture there within the context of this sort of like hunting societies, men's groups that would have been connected to particular animals that would have been like,
Some of the clans, like there's the bear clan and the wolf clan. You might have had, this is your group. When you're in camp and you did color war or something, except you're on Team Lion or whatever.
Because we don't see a map of the whole zodiac. You have to cherry pick. You say, oh, this is also in our zodiac. But you were right. It would have been one of the animals that they saw. That's what we see. All of the animals depicted at Göbekli Tepe are animals that were definitely in their environment, and they're depicted in the way that they would have appeared to them. So, for example, the lizards that are shown at Göbekli Tepe, the view that you see of the lizard is the view that you would see standing and looking at a lizard on the ground or on the wall in front of you. They're not depicted in a fantastic, like mythological way. They're not like the giant lizard monster in a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. They're just real lizards. They're not necessarily hyper-realistic because they're very early example of monumental art. They're rock carvings, but they're very much naturalistic in their configuration. They're not alien lizards. They're the present things of their environment, which is a simpler explanation. It satisfies Occam's razor better than Sweatman's star chart.
Yeah, so they're basically the next evolution of your cave painting, so to speak, is now you've been able to make it somewhat 3D by making it a rock carving, which is harder, but it's something that you learn to do, and some people learn to do it better than others.
And you build your own cave now too. That's kind of cool. And yeah, so very much I agree with that. And the other problem with the Sweatman argument is that the buildings had roofs. And so the Sweatman argument depends on them being observatories, like Stonehenge, right? It's imagining these pillars as maps of the sky,
right?
But we're strongly suggesting that there's like an arched roof, like a kind of a built arch over the special buildings. So how are you going to use it as an observatory if you look up and you see a thatched roof above your head? That doesn't make a lot of sense. And so it's much more like a ceremonial kiva in the Southwest. You go to like the Zuni Pueblo. What do they have? They have the clan of, the particular secret society of this male clan. What do? They get together as a group. They go underground in a big round building with an arched roof. It's called the kiva. And they sit in their kiva and they do their secret stuff.
So it's like a big chuppah, a big arched chuppah or a longhouse or whatever, without four walls.
Yeah, so I think that Göbekli Tepe is like, in my opinion, is that it's much closer to a Zuni kiva than it is to Stonehenge, even though it is an example. Both Stonehenge and Göbekli Tepe are examples of large Neolithic monuments, right? They're Neolithic, they're made with stone, but they're not. That's where the similarity ends. Just because they're both Neolithic doesn't mean that they serve the same function.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of putting the things on the bunks that need to be on the bunks and debunking some stuff and having some interesting conversation. I hope you'll come back again, because I think we've only scratched the surface of whatever, but I try not to have any guests go much longer than an hour, 50 minutes, hour and a half, because then, it's unfair to sort of them and, and everything. And we're recording this nighttime, so, there's that as well. But hopefully you'll come back. But before you do, one, you'll get a chance to, tell everyone where they can find and, follow you if you want to be found and followed or whatever, or if you don't, just don't tell them anything. But while you're contemplating that, or while you're telling that, you need to contemplate about what would you like the outro song to be? What do you associate with the conversation we've had, this subject? I have no idea why it's been in my head, and I'm not trying to influence you at all. Actually, I'm going to pretend that's psychic game. See if my Paraka skull is sending you a signal or not.
You want me to name the music?
Yeah,
that we're gonna
pick an outro song. Yeah, whatever you associate with, false archaeology, false anthropology, or just like what's bouncing around your head today.
That's so hard.
I know it's the hardest question I ever ask anybody.
Oh my goodness.
It's your fault. You should have listened to the show before. You'd have seen like so many smart people bumbling with this.
This is really hard. So what I would like you to do is tell me what was in your head, and I'll tell you. I'll either agree or disagree.
Okay. I have no idea why, but it might have had to do with when we're talking about all of the pillaging and whatnot. But the Joe Cocker song from 9.5 Weeks, I Do What I Do to Have You, Have You.
Okay. Joe Cocker is all right by me. Yeah.
It seems a little primeval, that song.
That's fine. Yeah, I don't object. Yeah, because it's been a long day and I'm a little bit fried, so I'd have to sit there and dig through my archives there. And I have a lot of esoteric stuff, but I can't connect one of them specifically to this conversation. So that'll work for me. Thank you.
Okay. So if they want to find Dr. Joseph Wilson anywhere, and then if he wants to be found, where might they do so?
Okay, so I argue with people about Peruvian mummies on Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, X, which Joseph A.P. Wilson 1. And I'm also on Blue Sky, but I haven't been doing as much there because there's not as many mummy fanatics to argue with. And
are you in the Flint Dibble Alliance?
So I am definitely friends with Flint Dibble. Flint Dibble is a polarizing figure in the alternative archaeology crowd.
Indeed.
And I try to be a middle ground person, but unfortunately there's just so much Flint Dibble hatred that I have to sort of stand with I stand with Flint against the people who are accusing him of being a liar and all that crap. I'd rather not invoke their names here because there's some not nice people that like come and attack you for defending Flint. But I think Flint has done a great job of trying to set basic standards for evidence. Doesn't mean that we always agree on everything, but no archaeologists ever do. Archaeologists are always arguing about the details with each other. And so it doesn't mean you don't have to always be right for you to be a good guy. And I think Flint's a great guy.
First of all, it's not Joe Cocker, it's John Taylor, but it's the same song. So
Okay.
don't go with me. You can leave your hat on as the Joe Cocker song, and now it comes to me. But it was the John Taylor one that I was thinking of, the guy from Duran Duran and Power Station, and probably other things.
I'm not wearing a hat right now, but I would normally. I often leave my hat on. So that's
of course. What kind of archaeologist doesn't? I mean,
yeah, that's right.
I mean, you would lose your Indiana Jones fan club card. Okay, well, listen, we'd love to have you back. We'd love to have Flint on. We'd love to have Mark Boslow and then anyone else who wants to share, but we're happy with you. And if you've had fun, then we'll plan something again. Folks, if you're here because you're here by accident or you're following Dr. Wilson, thank you. Welcome. This is Garden of Thought. You can find the show wherever audio podcasts are found. There's also a YouTube channel, which I only recently started, which has no pictures, but it's at Garden of Thought Pod. And if enough people subscribe, I think I will have pictures there. The show might go video there. Maybe it'll even be live, or maybe there'll be this regular show and a live show. Who knows? And you can also see my good-looking pro wrestler friends on the wrestling show, where I co-host with good-looking wrestler people, and we talk to and we interview other good-looking wrestler people or scary-looking wrestler people. We had Atrocity Cruel on without his mask. He probably would have had to put it on. So yeah. I have the doctor here, like, making fist bumps. So, are you a wrestling fan, Professor?
Oh no, I just think it's cool. Yeah, when I was a kid, I was for sure. I haven't been a wrestling fan in a long time. I just think it's cool because I've known some wrestlers, and so while I'm no longer a fan of the actual sport, I generally find them to be good people. Like people who've done for pro wrestling, they're fun and interesting people. So I think it's cool that you hang around with them.
Yeah, a lot of them are very much fun and interesting. A lot of very smart and very creative as well. But, I mean, they're people like anyone else, so, not everyone, of course. But, no, definitely interesting. That was the premise of that show, and it's turned out. And actually, the only people I actually really know in wrestling is as a result of this show, because my friend who writes music for some of the wrestlers is friends with PJ Black, who is Justin Gabriel in WWE, and he wrote his song, his entrance piece, and he says, my friend PJ talks about this stuff all the time. You should have him on your show. I'm like, can you make that happen? And he did. And this was show 50, so I didn't know what I could do and couldn't do. I mean, now it's like I try to get someone like PJ Black. There's no way it's happening without his help. But yeah, no, met a few people since then and in some other ways as well. But it's fun. So, folks, you can check out those shows and you can judge for yourself. Anyway, you're probably hearing John Taylor already, or you're about to hear John Taylor, and I guess you'll have to think to yourself, what would you do to have you have you? All right, everyone. See you next time.
you wanted to hear is my body heat, the right intensity. I do what I do.